Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Battle Buddy podcast. Today, we've got a great guest lined up for you. This guest has authored a couple of books. Today, we're going to talk about kind of the intersection between spirituality, mental health, those kind of things. First things first, because we're talking about mental health and those kind of things, just want to first and foremost say if you're struggling, remember you need to call 988. Use those lifelines or call a battle buddy, whatever you got to do, right? Just want to get that out of the way first and foremost. If you're struggling, reach out to those lifelines. But we're going to talk about spirituality, mental health, where those connect. We're going to talk about some of her books. They're titled A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. Those are stories about her life and her struggles. And then she's got a new book come out, America in Therapy, which I'm excited to kind of dive into and hear a little bit more about. My guest is over 30 years in the psychotherapist role. So without further ado, let's dive into it.
Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
So Phyllis, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Keith. It's just wonderful to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, no problem. I'm really excited to kind of dive into this because I think that there's a lot of connections here. I know on my own personal journey, my wife kind of yelled at me for years about, there's three types of health, right? There's physical health, mental health, and spiritual health.
Right.
I have to self-admit I was one of those people that ignored all of those in one way or another, probably like a lot of us. Hey, knowing is half the battle. But before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and your backstory. What I didn't tell people already.
Yeah. Well, I've been a psychotherapist for over 34 years and recently retired and just focused on writing. And really my whole career was birthed out of my own personal journey in life. I had some significant trauma of abuse in my childhood, and that left me feeling kind of lost and not understanding myself and having no knowledge whatsoever about the effects of trauma, let alone the fact that I really didn't remember most anything until I was in my 30s. So there was a big shadow over my life that at first drove me very much in a spiritual direction, looking for a connection to God, looking for a connection to divine love, really. And that was all really good. I'm a product of the 60s, so that was a big deal in the 60s. There was a lot of spiritual awakening happening in my generation at that time. And I got a lot out of following some meditative and, other paths of spirituality that were all really good. And I definitely had moments of deep connection to something beyond myself that was divinely loving and wise. And at a certain point, I realized that there was something really missing that, and I've told this story many times, I had a moment, a real moment where I realized that my whole pursuit was looking for God's love. But actually, I also really wanted to find love in the human world. I wanted to feel that my love was worthwhile and received by other people, and that I could receive love from other people. And at the time I had young children, and I was in a very unhappy marriage. And it just all kind of came together that, and some of my friends at that time who were also very much spiritual seekers were starting to go to therapy. And so I decided I was going to try that. And it was really one of the best things I ever did. And there are many best things that I did in my life, but it was one of the best things I did because it made me immediately aware that my conditioning and my early experiences had very much to do with the places where I felt blocked, the places where I was in pain, and the places where I wasn't living my full potential by any means. And so I just started on that journey of doing a deep dive into my past. My very first therapist said to me, tell me about your family. And I was like, well, my family's fine, and I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me, and I don't know what it is. And I think she probably looked at me and thought, we'll see about that.
We'll explore that, right?
We'll explore that. And so, I did many different kinds of therapy over several years, and I began to remember some of the traumatic things that happened to me, and the puzzle pieces of myself started to come together. And I went to graduate school and became a therapist myself because my own experience was so meaningful for me. Um, One of the first things I did when I went to therapy the first time is I went to the library, which people don't do anymore, but went to the library and took out a book on psychology. And the first thing I read was a list of the 10 most formative things that happen to people early on in their lives that shape some of the dysfunction and pain that they suffer later on, and some of the dysfunctional coping mechanisms we develop. So that opened that whole world of our conditioning. And then I'll just, segue really quick, and then we can come back to whatever questions you have. What I realized as a therapist, and with all the training that I did, I worked with a lot of children and families and couples and individuals. And no matter what population of people I was working with, it became clearer and clearer, and also from my own studies in graduate school, that our family dynamics have so much to do with what we come to believe about ourselves, the coping mechanisms that are role modeled for us that we develop, and that the family system is larger than our family of origin. It's our communities, and in a way, it's our country, and in another way, it's the whole world, because they're all family systems, and we all are conditioned by the parts that we play and the parts that other people play in relationship to us. So if our own family is pretty healthy, great, we have a solid foundation to go out into the world and be relatively, in our imperfection, contributing members of an adult society. And if our families are highly dysfunctional or overtly abusive, we come with deficits into the world around us, most of us. And of course, we all know exceptions of people who just rose from the ashes without any help. But that's not most people. And so that's what prompted me to write my most present book, America in Therapy, to bring some of the understanding that I got in my own journey and as a psychotherapist to the family of America, so that we could start to understand what's happening in our country today and what is needed to reverse courses from so much divisiveness and violence and discrimination and injustice. So that's it in a nutshell.
Definitely a lot to unpack there, but do you by chance remember the title of that book that you checked out at the library about
I do
this?
not.
Oh my goodness, that would be a fascinating read. I would love to
It
read that
was.
one.
Yeah.
Um, I can
Yeah, I
only
don't
imagine
remember,
what
and I
those
don't
things
even
were.
remember what was on the list. I just remember the light bulb that went off, that like, oh, this isn't, I didn't just get born flawed. There are things that happen in families that really condition the way we feel about ourselves, and ultimately what we bring to our adult life and our relationships in the world. But I'll see if I can find it. I have no idea what it was.
Yeah, no, I'm a very, I consider myself very inquisitive or endlessly curious kind of person. And as soon as you
Yeah,
said that, I was like, oh boy, very curious to know what would be on that
yeah,
list because I mean, there's two certainties to life. We're, first of all, we're all lucky to be born if you make
right,
it to that point. But the certainties are if you're born and then you die, right? And it's
right,
all of these variable moments that happen between point A and point B.
right,
And a lot of it's just circumstance, luck,
right.
chance, whatever you want to call it. That, like you said, it's the family structure around you, the community, the culture, the religion, what all these different
All of
factors that
it,
play into it, right?
all of it,
So that shape everything. So it's that'd be very very fascinating. Socioeconomic class and all kinds of different things that can
all of it.
play into that. So, um,
Exactly.
but yeah, America in therapy. That was one of the things I was going to ask you about. So, can you dive a little bit more into some of those topics and kind of
Absolutely.
what you found or what you've seen, with some of those things like social injustice and some of those things. I mean those are things that we've seen over the last couple years, and you know, um, this is kind of a unique episode for a lot of my listeners. They'll probably realize this. I don't typically go into religion or current things like that, but I think that there is some power to kind of talk about these things when to examine them a little bit. But I mean, these are things that we've seen over the last couple of years, from George
Right.
Floyd to all the other race things, and political divides.
Hmm.
Don't want to get into the specifics of them, but it divides us. You know, so what
Well,
have
I
you
think
seen in?
I think the beauty of psychology and psychotherapy that sort of forms part of the foundation of my book, and there's probably many pieces of the foundation of my book, but is that psychology in and of itself is not partisan. It's not Republican or Democrat or independent or green. It's not anything. It's about our mental health and what constitutes mental health. And one of the unfortunate things that is happening in our country, and probably has been happening in our country and all over the world for probably generations, is that we're being conditioned to believe that many issues that are actually mental health issues are ideological issues or partisan issues, when in fact they're mental health issues. And so one of the ways that I approached my book, and I'll try to make this really clear, and if it's not, please ask me to clarify. But one of the ways that I approached my book is that I took the lens that I have had for so many years of experience of looking at the individual family and what makes up a dysfunctional family. What are the dynamics of an abusive family? What are the dynamics of a relatively healthy family? Again, given that none of us is perfect and we're all on a growth curve. But there are notable dynamics that belong to dysfunctional, abusive, and neglectful families that I see playing out on a national level and through large institutions of power. And so I'm bringing that perspective of what we know and understand creates a cycle of abuse, perpetuates a cycle of abuse, and what happens to people who aren't healed or rescued from a cycle of abuse, and bringing that to a national conversation. And that's one half of the book where I really talk in detail about what those dynamics are. And I'm happy to share some of those with you here. And the other half of the book is like, what is needed to reverse this? What is needed to break the cycle of abuse that we have learned from psychotherapy and working with families and individuals and children and couples, that we could actually bring into national conversation for national healing, for bringing us back together and off of this ledge of such violence and divisiveness that we all know in our individual lives doesn't work. Fighting people don't accomplish anything except pain for themselves and pain for the people around them. And if it's a fighting couple, pain for their children. And so the second half of the book is really devoted to what is needed to reverse this course that we already know from the field of psychology works with people. And could we bring that lens to a national conversation for national healing? That's really the bottom line for my book. So
That makes a lot of
please.
sense, and I
Mhm,
love the way you kind of structure that. Um, but obviously, you're the expert on it from an
mhm,
outsider's perspective. I've talked to a lot of people about different things, but
mhm.
I know that whether it's an addiction issue or somebody who's in an abusive relationship, whatever addiction you've got or whatever issue you've got, you have to first identify that there's a problem
Right,
before you can take the steps to get out of that, whether that's rehab or leaving that
right,
person, whatever. So there's like a series of steps there. And then you have to leave that situation or get the help. And then you have to go on that healing journey. And so I love
right,
how you kind of, structured the book to kind of mirror that kind of
right.
step of like, hey, we have to realize what's like really going on here, and how this happens, or else that cycle continues. We see that in poverty and
Absolutely.
socioeconomic situations. If you can't afford to get out of it, of this situation, and you just fall into the same cycle as your parents and your grandparents, and it just repeats. If
Right.
you can't find a way out or you can't see a way out, you don't get out.
And if we look at just that issue from a larger perspective of a country or a state, or even a locality, there are many people stuck in poverty who really don't have a way out because the social conditions around them are not providing them with a living wage or adequate housing or access to health care. And we know in an individual family, if you had a parent who was taking one kid to the doctor and letting the other kid lie on the couch in pain, We would say that's mentally unbalanced and unhealthy. What's wrong with that parent? If you had a parent that was putting one child out in the cold and not feeding them and feeding another child, you would say there's mental illness going on in this family. And yet these same dynamics are happening in our country, where many people are disadvantaged because of the family dynamic that is running the country, economically, racially, gender-wise, in terms of education, healthcare, the justice system. There are many people that are being left out in the cold, and we're being fed that these are ideological issues. Some people are less worthy, or they don't deserve it, or they're lazy, or they're whatever, or entitled, when in fact the family system is not serving all members of the family equally. And so I call this a mental health issue. It's not a partisan issue, but we're being led to believe that, which only feeds, our divisiveness. If that makes sense to
Yeah,
you. Does that
makes
make
a lot of
sense? Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking of, how this kind of compounds things. You've got, I guess, normal civilians, and I think about it from a military perspective, and you think of veteran families who have to live in the civilian world just like everybody else, but then we have our own unique issues, physical health issues related to service, or mental health issues related to service. But then you still have the same socioeconomic issues. You still have the same race issues and religious
Right.
issues, whatever, right? That's
Right.
difficult to manage, right? And you still have
Right.
abusive households, and you still have substance abuse. We obviously know that's a
Right.
problem within the community. I've been talking about that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you seen, throughout your years of working, have you seen any unique things at play or in the veteran community with anything?
I have not worked with the veteran community, interestingly enough. I'm in New Mexico, and there are a lot of veteran services in New Mexico that I haven't been affiliated with. And so I
Okay.
think, yeah, so I can't really honestly speak to that, but I can certainly speak to trauma,
Okay.
because
Gotcha.
yeah, right.
Yeah. I would imagine there'd be a lot of unique twists and turns, to kind of deal with that, to complicate it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, add extra layers to it,
Right,
'cause
absolutely, and if you wanna add those, please do, but I'm happy to talk about trauma in a more generalized
okay.
way, and certainly, exposure to violence and, the things that a veteran would experience who is in combat could be highly traumatic, and I know if you ever heard of the book, um, The Body Keeps the Score. I think it's in that book, The Body Keeps the Score by
I have
Bessel
heard of
van
that.
der Kolk. I'm pretty sure it's in that book, and it may have been in another book, so excuse me if I don't have the right reference. But one of the things that I read about when I was studying a lot about trauma is that even among the vet population, people who have trauma prior to their service had greater propensity to have PTSD, severe PTSD after service, because there was already a foundation that was shaky inside from trauma that preceded whatever happened during their time of service. And so I think that's an important element to understand.
I think in some cases you could make an argument that there's a lot of people who serve to get away from those environments, to tie this kind of back
Mm,
to where we're at,
right,
I've,
right,
I've heard, um, I'm sure there's probably a lot of Marines that would listen to this and be like, yeah, that's me. I've heard that a lot about the Marine Corps. A lot of guys in the Marine Corps
hmm,
are just like, they get into the Marine Corps because that's a quick, easy way to get out. Um, More so than other branches. I don't know why. I don't know why it's always been that way, but
interesting.
you know, it doesn't matter really what branch, but a lot of people just like that's a way out. If you come
Right,
from a very poor area, whether it's urban, rural, it doesn't matter. And you're like, look,
right,
I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this small town, or I don't want to be in this inner city. And I'm tired of the gang violence, or I'm tired of living in the country.
right,
And I see the same 50 people every day, whatever it is. There's no opportunities here for me. I, I want a job. I want opportunities. I want skills. I want free education. I want all these
yeah,
things. Cool. I'm going to go
yeah,
join the military.
yeah.
And,
That's a really good point that I wasn't actually aware of. So thank you for making that.
yeah, I've known a lot of people who've come from, well, from those backgrounds, but I've known a lot of people who've come from, broken families, broken homes, violent backgrounds and stuff like that. And that's their way out.
Yeah.
is, hey, look, I can get a job for the next 4 years, get paid well, have medical benefits, get education benefits.
Right.
Then I can get my education and I can get a job. I can get a solid job and get out. And I don't have to
Right.
go back to this environment. And so there's a lot
Right.
of people that elect to do that. I've heard that there's a lot of people that happen to join the Marine Corps over other branches, more
Interesting.
so.
And we
I don't know
take our
why, but
wounds
anyway.
with we take our wounds with us. And that's kind of what I think psychology really helps people understand. And like I said, there's always stellar examples of people who rose from the ashes and somehow made it out of a highly dysfunctional or violent or abusive situation, and they go on to lead these amazing stellar lives. But that's not the case for most people. Most people suffer from their unhealed wounds in one way or another, and very often end up, intentionally or not, inflicting them on other people. And that's part of what I'm writing about in my book, that there are so let me just say quickly, maybe here, some of the dynamics of what we know of abusive families. And let me just say, you're saying, a lot of people who come from highly dysfunctional families. My experience shows me that abuse and neglect are epidemic in our country, and maybe all over the world. There is definitely not a focus on the health and well-being of the family in our country. There just isn't, because the resources are often spent in other places rather than on mental health, providing the best conditions for families to be able to provide for themselves. And many, many adults bring their stressors from their workplace, from poverty, from discrimination, from lack of social justice home to their families. And that's where their rage and their powerlessness often, sometimes very unintentionally, gets acted out. And so I want to say that it's epidemic here, because I've worked with hundreds of people over the years that appear to be functioning. They hold a job, they walk their dog, they go to the doctor, they take their kids to school, and there's massive suffering inside and dysfunction in their own lives, that often we don't see. And it's a kind of a silent pain that is echoing across many strata of America. But some of the main dynamics in a dysfunctional family, and I'm going to say an abusive family, so where someone is dominating and abusive of family members. And what you often see is that one dynamic is an abuser blames their victims for the abuse. I beat her because her dress was too short. I beat him because he got a bad grade in school. Those kinds of things, that there's always a justification for the abuse. And there is no justification for abuse in reality. There are other ways to
Right.
deal with problems in a family besides terrorizing people, hurting their bodies, or emotionally abusing them and giving them terrible messages about themselves. But that is an abuse dynamic, that the victims are blamed for the abuse. And we see this in the country. Poor people, they're entitled, they're lazy, they should be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they're making $7 an hour and they can't pay their rent, for instance. Another dynamic, which is and it goes along with that, is that then abusers blame their victims for their symptoms. How often have I heard over the years a client say to me, my father beat me, or my mother beat me, and then they said, stop crying or I'll beat you more. People cry when they're beaten. That's a natural symptom of having your body be abused and violated, and yet then they're punished for the symptom of crying. And this is widespread in our country, that the most marginalized, the most deprived, the people who suffer the most injustice on so many levels, whether it's racial or economic or gender or medical, whatever it is, have cries of pain. They're acting out. They may become addicts. They may do illegal activities to try to support themselves. And yet they're then they're blamed for their symptoms. And certainly not everybody who is oppressed becomes a criminal or acts out. That's clearly not true. But in family systems, we understand that the most symptomatic member of the family is crying for help for the family. And we look to the family dynamics to understand the symptoms of the most symptomatic person. I can give you a really down to earth example if you want one. And that is, I worked with a little girl who was wetting the bed, and she was 11. And her parents brought her to therapy. And I, sat down with the parents initially, which I usually would, and just sort of asked, what did they think was going on with their child? And they said they didn't know. Nothing was really, they didn't see any big things. I asked them how their relationship was. They said it was okay. And there were a couple of siblings in the family, and she was the one. She was wetting the bed. So I did something called a family sculpture, in which I had the whole family come in, and I asked each person to set a little scenario of anything that they wanted to express about their family. And the mother went, and the father went, and the two other siblings went, and they all made these little, and each person had a line to speak. They, mom's in the kitchen cooking dinner, dad's reading the paper, the kids are setting the table, that kind of thing. And then they each had a line to speak, and I don't remember what anybody's was, except when I got to the little girl who was wetting the bed. So everything was benign, and I'm sitting there thinking, what's missing from this picture here?
It sounds as like Leave It to Beaver as possible, right?
Right. So the little girl gets up, and she puts her mom on one side of the room and the dad on the other side of the room, and they're pointing at each other and screaming at each other to stop their drug use. Would not have known that had I not done that kind of an intervention and a sort of a information gathering session. And then it was clear what this little girl was the symptom bearer for the pain of the arguing and the drug abuse that was going on in the family. There was nothing wrong with her. She was the symptom bearer for the pain of the family. And we have so many symptom bearers for the pain of the American family. And that's part of what I want to bring to our greater understanding in my book, America in Therapy. We have to understand that our symptom bearers are crying for help, just like she was. She didn't know how to say, she didn't know how to tell me her mom and dad were doing drugs. But once, I don't know if she would have told me, but once she had the opportunity to actually show, she did. And she might have told me eventually,
Right. Well, that makes me think of, I was listening to another podcast, oh gosh, maybe a week or so ago. And the topic was kind of like about recognizing signs. It was a podcast that, actually about Buddhism, speaking of spirituality and stuff. But it was about recognizing signs. And then when somebody has an emotion like anger or something like that, that is not their natural state. And that you need to recognize that as just a sign of how they're reacting to something in their state. And then you need to dig deeper. And, just like the 11-year-old girl, she's peeing to bed. Well, that's not typically normal unless there's a medical issue.
Right.
So you have to dig deeper and see what actually is going on. And it's like, once I heard that, I was like, and then when you're telling your story, I'm like, there's a lot of times where we as humans could really just kind of take that advice, and it'd be so helpful to just be like, maybe I should just dig a little bit deeper and see what's really going on here, rather than just taking things at the surface level and just letting it, make you angry or upset or whatever, and see what, be a little bit more aware of what's really going on.
Right. Angry, upset, or judgmental, which is where we
Yes.
go, right?
We are very quick to be judgmental in this country.
Right.
Not one of our strongest suits, and we're probably pretty well known around the world for that.
Right.
And not a good thing.
I did some research, when I was writing my book on different topics that I was writing about. And one of them was a little bit about the criminal justice system. And one of the things that I uncovered when I was doing that research is that the statistics of unhealed child abuse among incarcerated people are way higher than the average population. So you have people who have untreated child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental and emotional abuse, who are at much higher risk for being incarcerated, and much higher risk for not having the education. I think they said the average age for the incarcerated person in America, the average age of education was fourth grade. So we're talking about people who are already highly deprived, emotionally and mentally abused, who are at higher risk for criminal behavior, and then they're judged and sentenced. And we don't have a criminal justice system that is dedicated to rehabilitation, which is what people deserve. They deserve to be understood for where their symptoms came from, and helped to, with any means that we have possible, to become functional, safe members of society and return to society as much as humanly possible. And of course, there's people we don't know how to treat, but there are many that we do.
Yeah, I had a conversation, actually, an episode that has not come out yet, but there was some tie-ins. Speaking of the prison system, with the institutionalization of prisoners and the institutionalization of the veteran population, that we enter the
Mm.
institution of service and we get out, and actually that there's more resources available to those in the prison system than there is to veterans getting out.
Wow, I did
There's
not
a
know
there's
that.
there's a transition assistance program ran by the Department of Labor, where in essence they basically tell you create a LinkedIn profile, create a resume, a couple of days, maybe a week worth of training on go get a job, do all these kind of things, and a few different resources. And that's about it. There might
Wow.
be a couple of other resources. Other than that, it's pretty much see ya, get out of here. Good luck on your,
Wow.
there's
Hmm.
the VA. If you want the VA resources, go get it. But you're pretty much on your own to just go navigate that system, but in many cases, there was a lot of truth to that. There is more resources between halfway houses and mental health resources and education systems within prisons. Like there are opportunities, some opportunities there. It was pretty profound when we had that conversation. But either way you look at it, they're both institutions, and you get out and you have to
Right.
give those people the resources to have an opportunity to stand their own on their own 2 feet and become productive members of society and reduce the stigmas that are attached, whether it's this person was a prison, this
Hmm.
person has a felony on their record, but hey, they've cleaned themselves up. They've got some education. Give them a chance. Let them be a
Right.
productive member of society, pay their taxes, do their thing. Because if they do that and they don't get in trouble and they're a productive member of society, guess what? They're not filling up their prisons. They're not interacting with the police. They're not causing problems. That it's reducing tax burdens and issues. Same things with veterans. If they're out there, they're doing things,
Right.
productive member of society, then it's less to worry about. It does bog down the system. So yeah, there's a lot to that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'm glad that you're speaking to the veteran population, because I know, and I don't have statistics on this, but some of the things that I was reading about when I was looking into the whole criminal justice systems that we have, is that a lot of those services are not provided by the prison system. They're provided by volunteers and other organizations. And it sounds like the veteran population really needs the same thing.
Yeah,
But they
there,
should
yeah,
be. It should be provided by the government.
right.
It should
You
be
know
provided.
what they do provide with the Department of Labor. I mean, it is important, right? LinkedIn profile, create your resume, helping people get jobs. That's important.
Right.
But you take people off the street, you put them in uniform, and you put them in for 8.5 or 13 weeks, whatever the branch is, the boot camp, and then advanced training, and you're indoctrinating them into this society for however long, and then they're in for 4 years, 10 years, 20 years in this system. But when they get out, it's a week long session of
Mm,
get a
mm.
job. Here's how you wear, put on a suit or dress clothes, whatever, update your resume, update your LinkedIn. Good luck.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it took you 13 weeks to go through basic training and another, I don't know, 6 months to go through advanced training 20 years ago. And then you just learn 20 years on the job in this system. And then you're going to be prepared for the outside in a week or 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
just,
You're so right.
it doesn't work. But I tell you what, there are a lot of nonprofits out there that are helping people kind of fill in those gaps and some other things. But yeah, there's always a need for more. I will say
Yeah.
that there's always a need for more.
Well, I think there's a need for it to be a national policy that we take care of each other, that we actually understand the depth of what can happen to people who are in service. And I'll say this, that we try to avoid war. We try to avoid it so that people are not traumatized by being in active combat, that we try to settle things the best we can and use military force only when absolutely necessary, and whatever that means to different people, obviously.
Yeah, we go
But
back to that philosophy of speak softly but carry a big stick, right?
yeah,
What
yeah,
was it? Was it
yeah.
Teddy? Was it Teddy Roosevelt that said that?
I think
Do I
so.
have that
I think
right?
so. I
Yeah,
think
I think
so.
that
Yeah.
that's like one of the coolest quotes ever. I have to pretty sure that was Teddy Roosevelt, the
Hmm.
coolest president ever, by the way. A
Hmm.
personal opinion. I mean, hey, big game hunter, like
Right.
the coolest dude of dudes. But anyway, um, I do want to kind of switch streams a little bit and kind of bring us,
Sure.
since we're talking about mental health and spirituality, I'm kind of curious, what is your definition of spirituality as you've kind of navigated throughout your career, what you've seen?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Um, this is the way I like to talk about it, that because I think this is what brings the world of psychology and spirituality, as I understand it, together. And that is, whether you're following a path of meditation or some kind of spiritual practice, or you're deeply involved in your religious faith. Um, or you're going down a path of psychological, healing, and sort of, healing the wounds of your past, and becoming a more functional, relational, peaceful, loving person, who is committed to nonviolent conflict resolution and healthy relationship in the present. The way that I see them coming together is that I believe, and I really see this in my own journey personally and with people that I work, I see and believe that we each have a very essential self, that we were born with before all the layers of conditioning and um, role models and experiences that we have sort of layered over this essential self, and that essential self is intrinsically loving. It's intrinsically wired to connect and bond and love and care and cooperate. That I have never worked with anyone who has peeled back all the layers of abuse or neglect or terrible conditioning, who has found some violent monster in there. It doesn't happen. The violent monster is part of the layering of very faulty human conditioning. And when you peel all those layers back and you uncover the true essence that a person was born with, and I believe each person was born with this, that's what you find. And I think that's the same essence that you find from any genuine spiritual pursuit, at least in my experience. And, other people may feel differently about their spirituality, but that's how I see them coming together. And I have a beautiful example of that is a client that I worked with who wasn't spiritual at all. Had no, that wasn't the very, very left brain, very rational, very like, sort of letter of the law kind of person who, whose spouse brought him to therapy. And he wasn't really having it. He was polite, and, they lasted a few sessions, um, and then a year later he came back because his wife wanted a separation, that she could not get her emotional needs met with this man. And she wanted to live separately for a while. And he was very upset. He did an unbelievable amount of therapy with unbelievable commitment and a deep dive that I never saw coming from this guy. And a year later, he had such a profound spiritual connection to himself. And he came in and he told me, my friends don't recognize me. They say, what happened to you? You're a completely different person. And that was from doing the psychological work, So I think all roads inevitably will end up leading to Rome, which is that we find our loving, caring, compassionate, and wise self.
So
So
do you
that's
think
my
it's
take on it.
Do you think it's really important for, I do want to recognize that there could be some people out there that are trying to get these right, like, gosh, atheist or agnostic or something like that, that don't really have a belief or belief in nothing, whatever it is. But whether it's Christianity or Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever,
Right.
that that you really explore that spiritual side while you explore the therapy and the mental health side, and like, what are your thoughts on the power of kind of exploring both of those together at the same time in a healing way?
I think it's fabulous if for anyone who feels called to explore both at the same time, because like I said, I think in their essence, they really go together. And I will say this, that going back to what I said earlier, we bring our wounds everywhere we go. And to the extent that our psychological wounds, and especially if there's been some kind of abuse or trauma or neglect, to the extent that we bring those unhealed wounds to our spirituality, I think for many people it distorts their spirituality. So if you grew up in a very abusive home where one person was like the judge and jury of whatever happened to other people and was very punishing, it is likely, it's not inevitable, but it is likely that you may gravitate toward the belief in a God that is punishing and violent, which some people have. So we take our unhealed wounds with us. And that's why I feel like actually the spirituality and the psychology need to go together, because to the extent that we can heal our own wounds that happen to us with other people, other people who were themselves wounded, then I think our spirituality is healthier, if that makes sense. And I could say a lot more about that, but
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I kind of opened the show with, my wife had been telling me for years I need to work on my physical, mental, and spiritual health. I neglected my physical health for many years.
mm,
But yeah, spiritual health was totally non-existent for me. Mental health, for many, many years now, I had been on kind of a journey of, kind of mindset and learning. I've always been interested in psychology, but just learning about myself and my growth mindset, if you will, for kind of a cliche term, but just only kind of in that way, but only over the last, gosh, I guess it's been since 2020 that I finally started seeing a therapist myself at the VA.
oh, great.
Have I kind of combined that? But it was last fall that I finally, kind of had a breakdown myself, and I just,
Mm,
well, not like, mental health breakdown, but I just kind of
yeah,
just like,
yeah.
all in all, I kind of told myself, I was like, all right, maybe my wife is right. I can't wait till she hears
Mm,
this, and she's gonna
mhm.
totally,
Right.
um,
Right.
she knows now. But I just realized, I was like, I'm too heavy. Um, all my, VA disabilities. I'm like, man, if I just lose some weight, I can reverse at least some of my labs. I know some of my things are not going to feel better. I know I'm still going to deal with X, Y, and Z. Maybe a couple of things feel a little bit better. But if nothing else, I know I'll feel better about myself. I know I'll look better. I know I'll
Yeah,
potentially have a little bit better energy. I'll probably sleep a little bit better. Those kind of things. And then I was like, okay, that's physical health. So I need to lose weight. Right. So I kind of dove into that. But then I was like, oh, my wife is probably right on spiritual health and mental health. Right. So I'm already seeing a counselor, seeing a whole health coach, got a
great.
nutritionalist at the VA. I used every resource that was available. But, then I really looked into the spiritual side of things. And I really haven't
Mm,
explored this too much on the podcast. But, for me, myself, what has worked for me, I grew up Lutheran.
mhm.
I ended up converting to Buddhism.
Oh,
And that
okay.
has worked for
Beautiful.
me. And that has, to
Beautiful.
me, has combined almost perfectly with my therapy at the
Mhm.
VA.
Yeah.
But to me, I look at it like, and that's why I wanted to ask your thoughts on it, because for me, it's like trying to lose weight with diet and exercise. You can lose weight with just having the right diet, or you can lose weight. You could potentially lose weight with just exercising a lot and eating the same. May not work all that well, but if you do all of it together,
Right.
you have a greater chance of success. And
Right.
then for me, really putting all three of them together, right? Kind of diving into this new religion that just kind of spoke to me personally, and continuing my therapy with the VA,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I've lost 60 pounds personally, and in some
Wow.
ways I feel a lot better. Some ways I still feel the same, but still, all in all, I do feel like a totally different person here. Gosh, 9 months later, but I do
Mhm.
feel like it really is like that diet and exercise together. Like it takes both of them to kind of navigate that. So I was really curious to kind of, you kind of
I
say have
love
some
that.
similar thoughts as I do.
Absolutely. And my path is similar. It just started out with, I started out with looking for a spiritual connection and then moved to the psychological. And the physical health hasn't been as much of an issue for me because fortunately, fingers crossed, I've been a relatively healthy person. But for sure, I really do focus on eating well and exercise and all of those things because our mind, body, and spirit do function actually together and they influence each other. So I love what you're saying, and I do really think that, and maybe some people don't feel this because it's either not their conditioning or it's not their nature or they just aren't this way. But I think that intrinsically, many people really long for a connection that's greater than themselves, however they term that. I think that's been in human history forever, different kinds of worship and religion and spirituality of all different kinds. And some of it very based in our wounds and some of it not. But I do think that there is a longing for a connection, beyond death that many people feel and desire. And so I think when it's possible to combine all three approaches, that's a recipe for a lot of healing. So I really affirm what you're saying.
I think everybody should at least take a really good look. The lesson of the day here is you should really just examine all where you're at with all of these things and say, okay, what am I
Hmm.
doing good here? What am I doing bad? Where do I need to focus my attention with these? Maybe I'm doing great. Maybe I eat healthy and
Right.
I'm in great shape and I go to the gym. Okay, that's great. Do I need to put the work in on the spiritual side? Do I need to put the work in on the mental health side? Right. Or
Right.
or maybe I go to church every Sunday and I go to Bible study or whatever the case
Hmm.
may be, whatever
Hmm.
religion is you follow.
Hmm. Right.
Maybe you've been ignoring the therapy. So
Right.
add that into it. Or maybe you've been doing all those, but you're eating McDonald's every single day. Um, you know, okay, put down the cheeseburger, go for a salad. Maybe not the
Right.
McDonald's salad because I think those have
No,
more
yeah.
calories than the burgers. I heard that somewhere. But
That's great.
switch it up, right? Focus on those because I do firmly believe that it's all three. And if you get those
Yeah.
kind of in sync and on focus, those
Yeah.
all kind of boil over to everything else in your life. It
Hmm.
what you
Yeah.
eat plays into the mental health and it all just kind of merges together, but then that plays into your
Absolutely.
relationships, your career. It's a compound effect of everything.
Right. And sometimes if you're really focusing on one, it will just naturally morph into the others. Sometimes if you're really right with yourself on an emotional level, it opens the door to your spirituality, or you automatically want to take better care of your body. And sometimes you just have to make a deliberate effort. It doesn't matter
Right.
where it comes from, right?
Well, I'll give you a perfect kind of point on that where one thing kind of leads to another. I'm not a big drinker in the first place. I will have a drink every now and then, but with Buddhism, where it's kind of frowned upon in most cases to drink. So, because of the religious aspect of it, because of mental health concerns of myself anyway, and the trying to lose weight, right? There's a lot of empty calories in alcohol.
Right.
All
Right.
three of those were factors in me of like, that's cool. I don't drink much anyway. So it's even easier for me to say,
Right.
nah, I don't need that. Same thing with soda. I've
Right.
had like 3 regular sodas all year.
Mm-hmm.
I just, it
Mm-hmm.
was one of those things where I'm like, I really don't need it. It's not
Yep.
that important to me now. It's,
Yeah.
I got to
Yeah.
cut it out of my diet and it was easy to do. But alcohol was a perfect example of like, it just kind of for all three categories for me personally, it was easy to cut out. So yeah,
Great.
there's bleed over and everything. So,
Right. Right.
but anyway, I guess last question I've got for you because I'm always curious anytime I have an author to ask this kind of question. You've written a lot. You
Mm-hmm.
got the books. I'm sure you've written a lot of blog articles and done some other things along the way. because of your past and some of your trauma, I'm curious, how much has writing helped you kind of process your own thoughts and emotions? And what
Oh,
advice do you have for other people to get out there and actually just start writing themselves?
great question. Great question. I think it's a huge part actually for me, and it may be one of even more than any particular spiritual practice that I followed, and I still do meditate. Um, but I would say writing is right up there as a spirit. It's a spiritual practice for me. It is the way that I connect to my deepest self, and it always has been. I think I was born that way because I knew that I wanted to be a writer when I was like a preteen. So, I highly recommend journaling and writing. But what I would say is it doesn't have to be writing. Whatever your creative calling is, it might be art, it might be music, it might be animals, it might be being in nature, it might be whatever calls to you. It can be your avenue of connection. And so, we have different callings. Some people will never write a word. I will never play an instrument. I don't have that calling and I don't have that ability,
That makes
right?
two of us right there. Yep.
Right. But some people playing music is like their lifeline to their soul, and their heart. And for me, writing has been that. And absolutely, and I think I'll be writing till I leave this life because it is that connection for me. But I would encourage people to just see whatever your connection is. It doesn't have to be writing, and journaling can be immensely helpful, especially if you just give yourself permission to put on the page whatever really wants to be spoken without editing it, without judging it, without feeling like anybody has to read it, but just letting your heart and your soul and your mind, express themselves fully. But again, you can do that in any area of creativity or self-expression.
I love that answer. And
Mhm.
I wish I could say as a young kid, I had a passion for writing, but I did not. I've gotten better
A
as I've
lot of
gotten
people
older.
didn't. Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
mind it so much now, although I do have to have my wife be my editor in chief and proofreader. Spelling was not my strong suit growing up.
Right.
Spell checker only catches so much. She has to catch all the other grammatical errors. That's the public education for you.
Right. Totally.
Not to knock the
Totally.
school system here in America, but it is what it is. I wasn't the greatest at English growing up,
Yeah.
but hey, they say it's a hard language, right? I'll use that as an excuse. But anyway, I want to throw this up here, scrolling at the bottom of the screen. All my
Oh,
guests that
thank
normally
you.
on here know that it'll have be in the show notes as well. But Phyllis's website, phyllisleavitt.com. I know you said you're going through kind of redesigning the website, right?
Redesigning the website. I hope it'll be up in the next few weeks, but basically you'll still access it through the same URL,
Okay.
and it'll just be a little bit more focused on it'll just be a better website. It
Okay.
just looks better,
All right.
and the content will be a little bit more updated on it. But there's a place on the website if you're interested in being on my mailing list so that I can tell you when my book comes out. I've signed a contract with a publisher and I don't have a date yet of when the book will be released. But if you'd like to be on my mailing list, please sign in on my website. There's a contact me place if you just have any questions or you would like, some further resources or information. I'm happy to respond to anyone. And then I'm on the, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all those places. And I try to post a lot of the talks that I've given and little blurbs that I put out as posts. So
Awesome. Yeah.
that's
By
where
the
to
time
find
this
me.
could out, you'll definitely have it updated by then. And I will say, I was telling you before we started, you've got a lot more information on your website than quite a few websites that I go check out.
Oh,
So
good,
everybody
good.
should definitely go check it out. Phyllis got a lot of stuff on there. So, and definitely check out the book. I'm very curious to see what you got
Yeah,
in there about America and therapy,
right.
because I'm a
Well,
firm believer that everybody in America should be in therapy. But the $1 million question is, how do we get more therapists?
yeah,
That's
yeah. And how do we incorporate some of the principles of the best therapy into our lives? You don't have to be a therapist to be less judgmental, to be more compassionate, to dig deeper into the causes of some of the dysfunction of our neighbors. You don't have to be a therapist to do that. And that's one of the points of my book is like, how do we take this out of the office and put it in the world? And by the way, I will send you a copy of my book when it comes out.
Oh,
So
awesome. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
I appreciate that. So before we wrap up, Phyllis, any other last words or
No, I
thoughts?
just want to say I really appreciate you having me here, and I love I love talking about bringing healing to America. So thank you for the opportunity to do that and for
Awesome.
your great questions and great reflections. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And like I said, I think this is the first time we've ever really kind of done a deep dive on mental health or spirituality. It's something I really
Great,
haven't dove too much into. So
great,
it's always great to bring a kind of a new topic to the show. So hope everybody enjoyed
wonderful.
it. And like I said, Phyllis's contact information is in the show links. So make sure you reach out.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you check out the website, battlebuddypodcast.net, for all information and resources. And like I always say, if there's a resource not on there you think should be, reach out, let me know, and I'll see what I can do about getting that resource on there. And once again, like I said at the top of the show, if you're struggling for any reason, remember 988 press 1 or text 838 255, because Battle Buddies, the most important thing is that you are here tomorrow.